Welcome to the Your Data Driven podcast. If you like this podcast, be sure to visit our website at yourdatadriven.com for more useful help and advice on setting up your race car, mastering data analysis, and driving faster. Welcome to episode 11. On today's show, I'm talking to Matt Neal, 3 times British touring car champion. Matt has raced in nearly 700 touring car races professionally. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation where we talk about being a racing driver. So many of Matt's experiences I'm sure you'll be able to relate to. He gives us some great tips and advice on how to manage our weekend, how to manage our driving. I hope you enjoy it, so let's get into it. So welcome, Matt.
Hi, Samir.
Thank you very much for taking the time. It would be lovely to hear a little bit about you and your story. You're a professional driver for those that may or may not know who you are around the world. But really, as a result, it'd be fascinating to hear some of your experiences over the years. You've been doing it a little while. And so I think you must have so many good ideas or so many thoughts that you could share to really help us as club racers to improve and to think about maybe 1 or 2 things that you've thought of over the years of like, yeah, that's really made a difference, and I'd never have really thought of that before.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah.
But firstly, though, are you okay? Because I think you had a bit of a bump January time, didn't you, on your bike?
I'm all right. Yeah, thanks. I had a mountain bike. I used to be into martial arts a lot, and then I had to sort of knock that on the head a few years back, and I got into cycling, mountain biking predominantly with a bunch of guys who are pretty well into it, and trying to keep up with some of them. I had a shunt in January where I had a falling out with a tree.
Oh no!
And I broke my clavicle in 2 places. My shoulder was a cumulative fracture. My scapula was fractured. My ribs are fractured, and then which punctured and collapsed my lung.
Oh my God!
So I made a good job of it. But so the collapsed lung with the old COVID, I've had to be quite careful with.
Yeah, I bet.
But I'm lucky I live out in the country, so I can. As I'm getting back up to speed, I've managed to get back out on my bike and go for a run, and you can stay on your own. You know, you're pretty well isolated out there.
So all those years racing cars, and then it's a tree on a bicycle that's hurt you most.
You know, something. I started on bikes. That's where I love 2 wheels. It's my passion. But 2 wheels have never been very kind to me. I love them, but I'm good at falling off them. And I've still got loads of bikes and motorbikes back home. It's still one of the playthings for me. Biggest adrenaline rush. But 4 wheels where it's happened, and fortunately I haven't had too many shunts just yet.
It's funny. I used to do back in another life. I worked at a proving ground called Myra, and we had a driver training program there that we would do predominantly for OEMs, for the car manufacturers, such that they would be safe when they were testing the cars. But one of the guys who was running the training, he would come back to me, with the latest story of someone, how the day had gone, because it was always an adventure. But he said it was the people who rode bikes and motorbikes that got it the quickest. They seem to have like a natural affinity or a natural ability just to drive a car better, particularly on the limit.
Yeah, we do a fair bit at Myra, and it sounds all glamorous. You'll know this. Being a test driver and all the rest of it sounds fantastic. It's the same as a race driver. It sounds great on paper, but when you see some of the guys at Myra and they're having to drive a digger truck in all weathers, in all seasons, out there for hours on end, in the open air, and you just go, man, I wouldn't do that for all the tea in China. And some of the bike riders on the oval, yeah, some of the bike riders on the oval, when they're having to do pillion. The one time we were there, and we were just by the fuel station, and this bike turns up, and it's got a pillion on it, and the pillion is this stunning young blonde girl, and she was a lap dancer by night, and in the daytime she'd come and do her test riding, and she was a professional pillion. So she would strap herself onto the back, go to sleep on the back of this bike while he's doing his 4 hours around the oval, doing endurance testing, and then back off to work at whatever club she was working at in Birmingham on the night. So, yeah, it's all sorts.
I tell you what, forget the motor racing conversation. This is way more interesting. Come on then. Right. So, you do a bit of driving and you've done pretty well. Tell us a bit about your racing career before we get into the details of being a racing driver.
Okay. As a racer, I've concentrated on touring cars as my formula, where I've made my name in British touring cars, but I've been around the block, down to Australia, Africa, Europe, racing around and about there as well. But BTC's where I've sort of made my name, where I've been for near 30 years now. So I am part of the furniture. I'm one of the old dogs, one of the old dogs with the old tricks.
Because you're quite tall though as well, aren't you? So was that a big part of deciding to go to the touring cars?
Practically, yes, but no. I mean, I love all forms of motorsport, Formula One and everything. I'm a fan of everything. And but where I grew up, I just wanted to. If one day I could just race a touring car, that was what rocked my boat, because touring cars, unlike some of the other stuff, it's very gladiatorial. The racing's not necessarily pretty all the time, but it's good. It's great for the fans. It's me versus you. Your car might not be as good as mine, but it's get your elbows out. That's what interested me, and that's what excited me more than driving a fast car. It was the sort of gladiatorial me versus you style of it. So the frenetic, racing that happens.
Yeah, well, you've done pretty well over the years, and you've got a good few rivals, haven't you? Have been around for a while as well. A Plato comes to mind.
I've had a few run-ins with a few of them over the years. Jason's probably one of the more better well-known ones, but I've had a few run-ins with, and we're all friends now. I mean, even Jason phoned me up the other day. We don't trust each other, but we'll speak to each other now. That's all right.
Well, that does segue into quite an interesting conversation, because even at a club level racing, you see your competitors fairly regularly, but there's always that tension a little bit between being friends because you share a common interest, and if you weren't competing against each other, you would probably spend a lot of time together at the pub or doing social stuff. But because you're competing, there's this kind of level of it's a sort of I don't know how to say it. There's a sort of an unspoken kind of guardedness that if you're not in my team, there's only we're competitors there, but we have a lot of respect for each other. But equally, we're not going to be best buddies certainly until after the race or over a longer period of time. Is that something you found?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've got some great friends in racing and stuff, but there's a lot of them I wouldn't trust as soon as they put the helmet on. Tim Harvey once said to me when I was getting into it, he said, make friends and be friends with everybody in motorsport, but never trust them too much, because one day they'll take you out. And it's true. And Tim is a really good friend of mine, in and out of racing. But if I get on a track, I don't trust him. I respect him, but it's just that, level of what they will go to, because I think in some of the junior race series, you can have 1, 2, 5, 6, whatever, really, really sharp people, who can intimidate the rest of the grid. When you get up to sort of the higher groups, people have won in all the championships. So you get a group of the whole grid's alpha males. And they'll pull your eye. That's what shocked me when I got into touring cars, that they'll pull your eyes out just for not to be last. No one wants to be it, so that you're going to fight whichever end of the grid you qualify. You got to fight on your hands.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. When you say trust, what do you mean?
Well, there's different levels of trust. There's drivers you trust. You'll drive alongside, you'll drive around the outside, and they'll give you slack. And there's in touring cars, the professional foul is in abundance. And there's other drivers, you like Jason, I know, even though I get on with him now, I know if I go around the outside of him, he will put me off. Fact, like I would probably do, I'd probably do it to him, and I've done to other people. That's just the name of the game. It's it's a bit of a dog eat dog environment you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things about club racing, which is different, is that maybe you've got less alpha males, but also it's a hobby. It should be fun. I mean, people do take it terribly seriously though, so there's an element of that, but hopefully it may be dialed down a notch or two.
Yeah, I mean, I have gone back and done some club stuff, and I've gone back. Like I didn't get the historic side for years, and people were trying to get me to go and look at the historic side. And then I finally went, and I got invited to Goodwood Revival, and I went there, and I walked through the gate, and I looked, and I went, I now get it, because it was just a magical experience. And anyone who hasn't been to the Revival, you need to go. But going just on from that is, the touring car world is a lot of people are there, and it's crocodile smiles. So as soon as your back's turned, they will stab you in the back on or off the track. It's all about winning. For your sponsors, for your manufacturers, for your team, for everything. When I went back and did some historic racing and a bit of club racing with the Synchro guys from Honda, people would smile at you. And, if you wanted to borrow something, people would lend at you. And it was just, I realized why I fell in love with the sport all those years ago, because it still existed in that form. And I've been so long in, the form where it's really quite vicious that I'd gone through points where I fell out of love with or lost contact with that side of the sport. And it was lovely to get me a real shot in the arm, and made me realize how lucky I am to be where I am and doing what I'm doing.
The historic stuff, I 100% agree. There's a very good friend of mine who races an historic escort, and we were at the members meeting last year, and we were meant to be this year.
Wouldn't have been this year.
No, exactly. Sort of last year. Which year do you mean? But the cold one, it was like 1 degree. It was absolutely freezing.
Sounds about right.
But it was really lovely because the event was a shared event. So it had, my friend who was driving, but he had a famous professional driver in with him. Can't remember who it was, but it was one of your colleagues in the touring cars. But everyone was really enjoying it, and it was very serious, and people were out to win. But it was just that element of love for the sport was really obvious. So I love the historic stuff.
Yeah, first time I got asked to test. It was a Sunbeam Listerland Sunbeam Tiger at Goodwood, and I went, yeah, okay, I'll go and do it. And then I remember being there, and obviously they've just run one tire for wet or dry, and it started to drizzle. And on the run down to Woodcut, the final big corner, and this thing wanted to go it was damp, and this thing wanted to go anyway except in a straight line. And I thought to myself, what am I doing here? What am I doing? Why am I in this car? What am I doing? And then I looked across out the window at about 150 mile an hour, and there was a Spitfire coming in to land on the runway next to me. And I go, that's what I'm doing here. How cool is that?
How cool is that? Exactly. Wow. Yeah. And they do like going sideways, those cars as well. I think that is part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose because in the last decade or so, I've been used to cars where you don't slide. It's all about grip, and if you're sliding, you're going slower. But the historic side and the tires are designed to react the same they did back in the day. That's part of the racing. And as soon as you get your head around that, I remember the first time I jumped in a Lotus Cortina at Donington on the short circuit, and there's obviously no dash or data or anything like that. I go out there and I think, well, I'm all right. I know the circuit. I know the racing and all that. I went out there and I did about 5 or 6 laps. I thought, yeah, okay. Came in and they said, yeah, that's fine. You're 5 seconds off the pace. I went, oh my God. So I went back out there and stuck my thumb in my throat, and I got to 2 seconds off. But then I had to really sort of think, oh, how are you going to drive? Is this car up to it? And it was. It's a different way of driving. You've got to take one chip out and put another chip in and really sort of get your head around how you're going to do it. You've got to work it out.
So that's a really good point, because a lot of people club racing as well have that same experience, albeit without your like your professional experience. So i.e. they'll go out and they think, right, I'm doing really well, and they come in and they're not on the pace. And so then it's a question of, well, what do I do? So how did you tackle it? You said you put a different chip in, but what was it that you actually did?
It's something. I've got two sons in their early 20s, and I've tried to explain it to them and to young drivers, because I think that the level of competition now is such at any level of motorsport or sport in general. People know what it takes to win. So people are prepared to do that, and it makes the sport become more specialist, even in different types of touring cars. So a lot of the British touring cars are front-wheel drive. You go down to Australia in the V8, the Holden Commodores, where it's rear-wheel drive with a locked diff and all this sort of stuff. And a lot of us who've gone down there really struggle to get our head around them. I mean, it's not because we're idiots or we don't know how to drive. It's the different discipline, and the disciplines become so specialist. This is why you can get someone out of Formula One, and they're at the pinnacle of the sport in its entirety. They come to touring cars and they'll struggle their nuts off. Dario Franchitti went from blitzing IndyCar and Champ Car and all that. You put him in a NASCAR, he couldn't get off the back of the grid. And you speak to Dario now, and he hated every second of it. Just couldn't wait to get out of him. It's the level of the sport, any sport, I think, is just so specialist now. You've got to understand it, and I always say you've got to try and come out, and you've got a lot of that is figuring out. If you haven't got data, which you haven't in a lot of these cars and the older cars and club cars, it's literally you've got to sit down and think hard. It's something I've said to my boys. It's not about going out and having. It is about going out and having fun, because I've said that to them. I want them to enjoy the experience, but you've got to work at it. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, how have you used data in the past?
Data is, I think, it's a magical thing. It's an evil thing now. Now I'm old and I've got the experience. Because now, if you fart in there, they know what volume it is. Everything about you, from the time you get in the car to the time you get out, everything is recorded. So young drivers coming in, it's very easy for them to fast track up levels, because it's monkey see, monkey do. They go out there and they'll drive it like a video game or whatever, and then as long as they don't put it in the wall, they can come in. If they're 2 seconds off the pace, they go, right, you've got to brake 5 meters later there. You've got to carry another 2K on your apex speed there. You've got to this, that, and the other. And, they can just go out, get a bit closer, read the data again. Oh, no, you're still a meter later there, or you're braking too late there. It literally is. You can be monkey see, monkey do. And where the strengths of the older drivers, more experienced drivers, becomes in developing a car, making it as fast as possible. Because often, and I've been guilty of this, you make a car nice to drive, not fast to drive. And that's something I've tried to install to younger drivers as well. You've got to look where the car is never going to be perfect at every corner of every lap of a circuit. So you've got to make it as quick as you can, and you've got to sacrifice certain corners, and you've got to work out what time you make up in what sectors of the track, and focus on those areas and those strengths. Does that sound confusing? Do you understand that?
No, absolutely. I'm just fascinated to listen. I mean, I'm an engineer, so that's sort of natural for me to hear. But I think for some people listening, that will be news.
So Brands Hatch Indy circuit, which a lot of people know, I always say you've got to have it so it's scary as hell. You can just hang on to it through Paddock Bend, turn 1. Because then it pays you back everywhere else around the circuit.
Is that scary as hell, as in loose? As in, yeah, or scary as hell because you're not going to turn in?
No, loose.
Yeah.
If it's pushy, if it's understeering, that's safe. And there's certain tracks you want, a bit more push and everything. But I always think you've got to have it as loose as you can, hold on to the rear. And in touring cars, we use the rear steering a lot. So we tune the car we're not allowed electronics, so it's done on a bump steer system. As the car rolls, it'll steer. And you've got to have it as much as you can live with. literally, and then that will pay you back around because the rest of the track is quite technical. It's slow to mid pace really, bar the kidney.
So I think a lot of paddock wisdom would say that a racing car shouldn't have bump steer, and when people talk about steering, setting up the steering or the geometry, they're normally talking about sort of static toe settings rather than what it's doing through bump. But you're saying on the rear you want to have some steer going on that's going to give you a bit more nervousness maybe around the corner, but it's going to pay you back around the. You're going to be able to get the benefit of that by having a more agile car, perhaps through the recipe.
It's how it works. You've got to realise you've got to use the attributes. Static toe is obviously has a similar effect, but it will be instant. So you'll get it on more from when the car's in a straight attitude, and it drags. You gain drag from it, so it'll cost you straight line speed. With using the bump steer system, then in theory it doesn't cost you anywhere near as much in drag on the straights.
Got you. Yeah. So you've looked at like the data and such like. Is there anything you do? So that's sort of the engineering, the car side. But is there anything you look at? I mean, you sort of touched on it with these kids kind of coming through and they can do it. But is there anything you've done with the data that you'd think, well, if I was on my own and I did have a bit of data, what was the first thing you would look at?
I mean, one thing I got to Ricard Rydell he used to be a fanatic for using the data can work out your corner exit speed. So at a given point where the G lessens, it will give you a point where you're exiting that corner, and it would record, and he'd have it displayed on his dash, exit speed of that corner. And if it's 2K, 1K, half a K, as long as you can maximize, you work out, because half a K exiting the corner up, you're half a K extra going, okay, it'll peel off with aero, but it's you're half a K carrying down the first half of the straight extra, so it's free time you're going to gain. I find really useful the C time, which modern data loggers and the dashes we have, and that's why C time. I mean, it's a comparison. So you program in your quickest lap, or a lot of them they record the quickest lap, and then you compare you can split it into sectors and you can compare. So the dashes we've got, it's live, so it's literally as you can scrub a little bit of speed, get a little bit sideways coming out of corner, and you can see the time disappearing down the straight or gaining the other way around. Yeah. It's very frustrating, or very rewarding. So I've done that right. So you can record that in your head. And one of the things I've really been avid on is making notes. Every time I've gone to a test day, a race weekend or whatever, every time out in the car, I will make notes of what it's doing, why it's doing it, what I've done, how I've done things we've changed, things that didn't work, things that did work. And then that is my bank of information. So anytime I will go back and either drive that car again, if it's not a car that I drive very often, or I drive that circuit again from year to year, I've got a pool of information I can go back and I took that curb, it worked. I took that curb, it didn't work. I took more of the curb, I took less of the curb, I took the grass, just for notable points as well as car points, on what you're doing on the track on that day.
I mean, is that something, I don't want to sort of call you out on this too much, but is that something you actually do? Because a lot of people talk about doing notes like that. And you say it and it just seems, yep, that is the thing to do. But in the heat of the moment, in the practical realities of running at a race weekend, people may or may not, I'm smiling when I say this, put note taking and what they might call administration down low on the list. Is that something you've done as a discipline?
Yeah. Every time I get in the car, every session, because we'll have a debrief after each session, and I'll sit there with my laptop, and it's something I've badgered when Gordon came into the team. He didn't do it, and now Dan's into it, and Dan's very good with it. And then what we do is we exchange. I'll at the end of the weekend, or the following days, I'll email that to my engineer, but copied to Dan Camish, and his engineer, team manager, so everybody knows. And I'll put my things I thought were positive with. I don't just use it for that. I put things on there that I think were positive with the weekend, and gripes I had over the weekend and why and so forth. Just so it's everything's down there, everything's remembered, and it's documented.
Do you use like a track map or something to help you with sort of specifying different parts?
I have done with circuits I don't know, or when I was younger, conversing with engineers, they'd use a track map, and you write your notes on a track map. I've done that. Now I just write. I write just a document where I'll go specifically through different attributes of the car, the brakes, what we were doing on the brakes, how we were running the brakes, the engine, the transmission, the diffs, the starts, general handling through the sessions, and then I will go through it corner by corner as well. What was happening in each corner, how we were taking each corner, what was good, what was bad. So again, you've got an understanding of, and then I'll read my notes from the last time we went to the circuit next time I go there. So you're walking in with your eyes a bit open.
Do you do things like track walks and stuff if you get the chance beforehand, or do you know the tracks well enough now that it's not really something you'd do?
Again, I'm a bit lazy with the British tracks because a lot of them. If there's something changed, I will go and walk it. I went back to Bathurst, not this year, was it? I think it was.
That's quite a long walk, that one.
Yeah, last year. I walked around, because I haven't been to Bathurst in 10 years. We went and did a track walk, and that is quite a long track walk. You don't realise how steep the hills are there as well. They call it the mountain for a reason. Yeah.
Even on your bike, there, you're going to struggle up that one.
Yeah, they say the Aussies are all, a bit maverick. They are so anal now on the health and safety and that. You go and do a track walk, you've got to wear all high-vis clothing and everything. I mean, I said, what's this? Last time I came to Australia, it was nothing like this. But, but you'll go with your engineers, and you'll be discussing stuff with your engineers all the way around. And so it's just to refresh your memory, and it's a good habit to get into. That
must be a nice track to drive. I've done it on on a simulator, but I haven't done it for real. It must be an amazing track.
Yeah, it's something you've got to go either by spectating or driving. I always say there's two probably favourite circuits in the world, which a lot of drivers, they are my favourites, and one's Bathurst, and the other one's the Nordschleife, Nürburgring. And people ask why, and I said because they're the most scary. And by scary, I mean they're the most. If you do well, they're the most rewarding to do well on, because they are pretty intimidating. You make a mistake, and you're in the wall or you're in the trees. So it's but those are probably two choice ones.
Have you done many laps around the Nordschleife? Because again, in a former life, I used to work at Aston Martin, and we had a base out there where we were developing. So I did the suspension for DB9 and V8 Vantage years ago, and we had a setup at the Nordschleife, and it was for ride and handling, but it was also very good for brake development and stuff like that, because it's really harsh on the brakes, particularly for a road car. But the guys who were there, the test drivers, they were like, it takes like 100 laps, they reckoned, to know the track. I mean, what do you think about that? Have you done it? Have you done that many?
Have I done 100? I'm not sure. I've done 2 24-hour races around there. One with a private BMW, and then one with Nissan Motorsport in a Skyline.
Nice.
Yeah. Both times the cars broke. So it's a different experience. And I've been back down there a few times on the Grand Prix circuit. But whenever you go there, you've got to pay your €13 or whatever you pay, and go and have a razz around them, and just have a, because half the fun is just showing people what it is, and it is eye opening. I got taken around there the first time by a instructor, George Weber, years ago, and I was terrified.
I was going to say, when you go around with someone who knows it, you're like, what are you doing? You're mad. Oh, no, actually you're not. So there's crests and curves and everything looks the same. How do you know where you are?
Yeah. When the car's off the ground and unweighted and everything, there was a factory, this Japanese driver who drove for Nissan in this car with me, and there was 4 of us in there. It was a Wolf Sierra Cosworth, so decked out with 4 bucket seats,
Nice.
racing seats. As my teammate in the front, a guy called Soames Langton, who's no longer with us, and in the front, and then me and this Jap in the back, and this Jap, we get sort of only 20% of the way into the lap, and it's like you've put on that Japanese endurance program. He just starts screaming, which I was terrified. But I'm laughing my head off because he's screaming so much and wailing and everything every corner we went round.
He's pressing the eject button. Where's the big red stop button? Yeah. Oh, fantastic. One last thought I had for you. And this is probably, again, something that is a long distance pass for you, but this is about managing your pre-race nerves and getting yourself kind of in the zone, because particularly, there's a lot going on before a race, and then suddenly the light goes out and you've got to be the racing driver, and it takes, there's a switch, a mental switch that you have to like be on it. Is there anything that you do that people would find helpful in terms of, people get really nervous, the tension builds up. And one of the things about circuit racing is that they're not one after the other. They're like, there's long gaps between them, and for you to get even more nervous. So how do you manage your nerves if you get nervous at all?
I do still get nervous, and not for the race per se, because I've done a few races now. But the nerves are because you don't want to make a mistake. And I think I've always tried to say to people that the line you walk between looking a genius and looking an idiot is very fine, and especially when there's other influences on you. So I'm annoyingly superstitious, right? Annoyingly, and you get yourself into your safe place. You have to sort of work out how to get into your safe place. When I started in motocross, and I can remember I'd sit on the line for motocross, and I had this sequence I'd go through of I check the brake levers, and you sat there waiting, to go and check the fuel was on, check the choke was off, and I'd do it, and as soon as I'd finished it, I'd start doing it again. And I'd just keep going through this sequence, and it annoyed me that I knew I'd done it, and I'd keep on but that was my safe place. In sort of four-wheel motorsport, I have to get up a certain way, I have to eat a certain way in the breakfast, I have to get dressed a certain way, get in the car a certain way, and then I've got this, but that puts me in my safe place. To combat with some of the nerves in previous years, what I used to sleep between races, and as long as there's someone's there to wake you up, and or you got an alarm you can set, I found that was the best way to refresh my batteries, reset the start button and keep clear-headed. But I mean, I will go to a point where I will keep on going through my routines right till the point where you start the green flag lap. Then you go into no thinking mode. You just go into habit. Get your tires warm, get your brakes warm, get your diff warm. Making sure everything's there, and then you just go into the site. What I'm doing is I'm sat on the grid. I'm going through I'm trying to sort of close my eyes, and wherever I am on the grid, I try and think through what could be the potential outcome of the good start. What's the outcome of that? Bad start. What's the outcome of that? If he goes to the outside, and what am I going to do? If he goes to the inside, what am I going to do? Try and think of every scenario. So when you arrive at the first corner, good start, bad start, average one, or whatever, you've got a method half figured out. So you've pre-thought it again. And then with the BTC card, there's at the moment to get them. I always say the hardest thing is to get one off the line. It's a 10-stage process you've got to do to get them off the line, and there's still some variables in it. So you get into a point where you sort of start focusing on that. Focus on things that are important and things that can be important. I find those help me, and I always think that little few nerves, the butterflies, I think they're healthy because they mean you care and that means you want it. So I always think if I'm ever not nervous, I think that's when I'm ever going to not have a good result.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good point to say on that one. I mean, some nerves are really, really important. It's fascinating to hear actually about how you've approached that, and I think that will come as relief, I imagine, to many people listening, because you put a lot of pressure on yourself, particularly before the race to make sure you just get everything going to even get into the race. And ironically, when you get through those first couple of corners, you can almost relax into it. It becomes a lot easier.
Oh yeah, you just go into just not thinking mode. The concentration is so high that you just get on with the job in hand. So the nerves go very quickly.
Thank you very much. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear about how you've approached that. I think people listening will be really good. Where can people, reach you and your team online if they're not familiar with you?
Normal social media. So Twitter, Matt Neal Racing, Instagram, Facebook, all the rest of it, or Team Dynamics Motorsport. They're all on the different social media channels. Any of them they can sort of grab us on, and good. We get plenty of message on there, good and bad, after some race week. So some of the sledging is quite entertaining. I mean, that's one of the other things. Some things do happen, but you're never going to please everybody, and you always get supporters for people who you're racing against. So the other bit of advice: don't take everything to heart, because there's always people, going for the other guys, voting for the other guys, and they're not afraid to express themselves. And social media and that it's a wonderful thing, but it's an evil thing as well, because they have direct access straight to you. So you just got to be cool and figure out that you're not going to please everyone every day of the week.
Yeah, I think that's a really lovely way to think, to summarize, because at the end of the day, you're doing it to, you're just doing your best, aren't you? And that's all you can do. And there's different levels. You're competing professionally. Club racers competing for fun, but they still want to win and do the best. And sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes you're going to struggle. And the decisions you make in the heat of the moment are difficult sometimes, and equally what other people do too. So, people listening, they do struggle with nerves, and they do struggle with dealing with their friends in the paddock, and they do struggle with how do I find that time that these other guys have put on on the leaderboard? They're just looking at the times, going, I just don't understand where there's 3 or 4 seconds a lap to come from. And they go out, and there's 2 choices. You either go super analytical, maybe like Rydell, or you go heroic, which is slow as well. So to have some structure to how to improve is, I think, really valuable to people.
You just got to be disciplined with it, and just and you want to. But the other thing I've said to my boys, I said, you've got to want it. You've got to be disciplined with yourself. You've got to be hungry, but you've got to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy the ride, because, Cole Fogarty said to me years ago that every race he did and every championship he won, he never enjoyed one, because as soon as he won one or won a championship, he was always worried about the next one. I could really relate to that. So it's something I've always tried to, as later on in my life, I'm thinking, man, you've got to enjoy the ride as well.
Yeah. You couldn't have said it better. And, I hope you get to do some more historics. If I see you in the paddock, I'll come and say hello.
Please do, yeah. Please do.
The escort went pretty well last time, and unfortunately, it was run by a very, very close friend of mine who used to look after my car, and sadly, he's passed away in the last few months. So we'll be out with his son, and hopefully they don't give me the spanners, because I'm not that good with them, but I could get a driver changed, but that was about it. But if we see you around, I'll come and say hi.
Great. Cheers, Samir.
All right, thank you very much.
No worries, anytime.
Okay, bye for now.
Thanks, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, what do you think about that? How great to have Matt on the show. His experience in touring cars is unrivaled, but yet he's still facing challenges that you and I as a club racer would consider that a professional wouldn't have to worry about. I really hope that those insights and those suggestions will help you in your racing as well. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and visit us at yourdatadriven.com.